I'm Nels Carmen, head of the Penfield Trails Committee. And will the Penfield Trails Committee please stand up? These are the people that put this show on for you. Wait. For the 6th year in a row, the order of commentary is then turned over for the true welcoming of you today as you slink and swerve by the concession stand and meander your way to chairs. Our town supervisor welcoming us today, Anthony LaFountain.
Good morning and welcome to Penfield for those that are not Penfielders. This is my start of spring right here. Now I've stood here in the past and looked out and not being able to see any of your cars in the parking lot because it's been snowing so hard. But today we have a little bit better of a day. This program, and a special kudo to our Trails Committee. This group of dedicated men and women do so much to help push the envelope of progress in our trail system in Penfield. And I'm so delighted that they do that. We work very closely with them to help them in a lot of ways with some of our equipment, some of our funding, and certainly some of our personal resources of our employees. And I really appreciate the fact that they keep us focused and they keep us driven to try to make this one of the areas that a lot of people, not only our residents, but outside of Penfield, like to come to. So on behalf of our entire town board, I know it's going to be a great, and Linda Cole from our town board just walked in, so perfect timing, Linda. But on behalf of our entire town board, we welcome all of you. I think you're going to find the speaker today a fabulous speaker. The work that they do for us across this county and then the counties around Monroe County is just fantastic. Rich Perrin, the leader, you'll have an opportunity to meet him in just a moment. But they're a great group to partner with. We're delighted to have them here today and to be part of our program. And I'll turn this back to Nels Carmen and his team, and enjoy.
What brought our theme for this year's Hikers Jamboree about was an article in the DNC in December. And Terry Smith, who will be up next, turned me on to this. And I said, this is going to be our speaker for the Hikers Jamboree. We have recently become very ambitious within the Penfield Trails system to expand to our borders and link isolated portions, clusters within the town and try and connect them into larger trail systems. But beyond that, what happens when we come to our border? Well, maybe we can match up with a nearby town and create a system that actually closes into another system. And there are gaps right now, barriers, if you will, in doing that. We must knock them down. So awareness and action in this general theme, not only within the town, but the Genesee Transportation Council had something, a hot item coming up, $100,000 grant concerning with closing gaps where systems can meet systems. And so that will be our theme. But first, Terry Smith, who is our main ambitious person to expand the 5 areas with exhibits within our town of Penfield. Terry.
Thank you. I wish my map was bigger, but I'll try to. I recommend that you do come up and take a closer look at what's up here after the main speaker. I'm kind of the warm-up. The Trails Committee has been prioritizing which trails we're going to work on and where we need town support, where we're cooperating. And the focus has turned out to be that of connectivity of our trail systems. So we're looking at, and our main focus right now kind of starts out in Chan Philbrick Park, where we're looking for a connection to the Parrington Spring Lake Park. There has been discussions about a trail in that area, and I understand that the Parrington is working on a possible grant to make that trail connectivity. The goal is that we would get all the way from Spring Lake Park through Ellison Park, through Lucian Morin Park, and all the way up to Abraham Lincoln Park. That would be about somewhere between 9 and 10 miles in trail lengths. Now you say, boy, that seems like a monstrous task. But when we started looking at it, a lot of that is already in place. The missing links are the section actually to Spring Lake Park. This all exists. There is a new pavilion here at the corner behind the corner confluence of Allen's Creek and Irondequoit Creek behind Tops. There's now a pavilion out in back of there, and we have completed the trail from this point under Penfield Road, under Old Penfield Road, and we're now positioned that we are on Old Penfield Road to connect with the Manitou Lake property. The Manitou Lake property is a big link, a big chunk, a big hole in our system. And this map here shows the Manitou Lake, and there are pictures, and there, if you look close, you'll find numbers along the trail that correspond to those pictures. So for those of you that haven't walked the Manitou Lake Trail, you can get an idea of what the trail is going to take you through and what you're going to be able to see on that. Once we get through the Manitou Lake, we're looking for two paths, possibly three, but one of them comes back up to the overlook which exists. It's the Coyote Den Trail and the Overlook Trail that are in Ellison Park. There is now a path, unofficial path, that comes down in this section here. The other plan is, at some point, is to do a grant that would enable us to put in a pedestrian bridge from the Manitou Lake property into Ellison Park. In fact, there was a TEP that was prepared at one point in time. Fairly recently, it just wasn't approved, but the effort was put in to move that forward. There are then paths that go through Ellison Park, and maybe I need to take just a minute here to say we're very fortunate to have 3 county parks in the town of Penfield. And where trail systems already exist in those parks, we get a chance to use them and to connect with them and to help maintain them. So Trails Committee is active in trying to help out and make sure that those trails are in good condition. There's roadways and paths that go through Ellison Park. The next hole in our system is from the northwest corner of Ellison Park up to and underneath Browncroft Boulevard, over to Old Browncroft, and there's a lot of this is Ellison Park property. It belongs to the park, so we need to work with them to get permission. We also have the Water Authority has a plot there that we need to get through and to get easements for. At this point, there's also a canoe launch site that needs to be improved and to have permanent easements for access to that canoe launch site. From this point, we can connect using Old Browncroft Road, connect to the East Side Wetlands and the Rifle Range, which are all existing trails, which then get us up to Empire Boulevard. From Empire Boulevard, the goal is we're working with, the town is working with the Daniellis on the new marina proposal that would allow paths, walking paths, trails along the south side of the bay. We then, Jim Costello of the town is looking at the possibility of getting easements up in this area that we would ultimately be able to connect the Abraham Lincoln Park with have a trail all the way up here. So we'd be able to get all the way from the YMCA in I guess that's Penfield, all the way down to Spring Lake Park. So what seems like a monstrous task is really now broken down into a couple of obstacles. That's one. Another connection trail that's on our list is to get from our Arundecoy Creek Trail all the way over to Corbett's Glen in the town of Brighton. We're looking at the feasibility of doing that. It's been on our list for a long time, but that certainly is a goal. A side track of that is to get from the mobile home complex up on 441 for them to be able to get down to Panorama Plaza. So that is kind of a second part of this section of the trail system. One of the things that we have overlooked up until now is the use of existing sidewalks in the town, and how could they be used as interconnects or actually be trails in themselves. How many people have driven up Panorama Trail and the great views of looking down into the valleys along there? So there's a sidewalk that literally goes up to Empire Boulevard. People should be able to walk that. I mean, it's a great, there's a lot of pretty scenery along there. And there's also, from up in here, if we do use that as a sidewalk trail, we don't have parking, but there is town property that goes all the way down to the east side of the creek that could be kind of an extension to the Panorama Sidewalk Trail. We also have a couple of trails that are sidewalk trails. This is on the Wegmans Passport book, along with the historic trail to get people out and just walking. Rothus Park there's been a long-term goal to get Rothus Park connected with Veterans Memorial Park. The first phase of that would be to get a trail that would come out to Atlantic Avenue. Atlantic has sidewalks along a good portion of it, and there is sidewalks in this area here. One of the other alternatives, this is a wetland, will need involvement with DEC. That would be phase 2 of this project. The other option is to get sidewalks along Atlantic Avenue, which would also mean that there's a bridge right in this area here that's basically 2-lane car and no provision for walking. It's a dangerous place to walk. So I say this to the town personnel: anytime that bridge is to be replaced, please provide a walk path on the north side of that bridge to connect with other trails.
Which bridge is it? Which bridge is that?
It is just east of where Baird joins Atlantic. It's a fairly short, very narrow bridge. Everybody understand where that is? Okay. One other trail linkage that we're looking at, this one is somewhat ambitious, to be able to get from Harris Wayland Park up to the Veterans Memorial Park. But there are sections of that are nice sidewalk street areas that could be utilized in that. So this is where we're kind of looking at this right now and saying, how can we do it? We've also picked up another piece of property. The town has picked up another piece of property down here and actually has some right-of-ways up in this area and some isolated ponds that they own the property. The town owns the property around those, so those could be hitching points to connect into. The other ambitious trail, this is part of the Commission Ditch. This is Sherwood Fields, and we did come up and develop a hiking trail along a small section of the Commission Ditch. The interesting thing that we ran into in going through that, we went to DEC to get approvals, we got delayed, we had to deal with the federal wetlands. The answer that came back was, as long as you don't take material in or take material out, you can have a walkway through or around the wetlands. So the plan now is the town is actually working on getting easements along the Commission Ditch to be able to facilitate maintenance to keep the ditch clean from a drainage standpoint. As part of that, Jim and Jim Costello and Jeff Benway have been involved. They're aware of this, and we've had meetings with them. So they're going to look at how do we incorporate a trail easement as part of the maintenance right-of-way easement. And that would allow us to get all the way from Sherwood Fields up to Veterans Memorial Park. The other obstacles that come with that.
Where's Veterans Memorial Park?
Right here.
Where is it?
Right here. Atlantic, right here. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
For those that might not be familiar.
yeah, you're here. The trails are right out back here. All right. So that's another fairly ambitious, but there's reason to believe it could be implemented. The obstacles there are anytime we have to cross a waterway, if we're going to put in a bridge, we are going to need DEC approval. That system could be expanded even further. This is more commission ditch on the other side. The map over here is the existing long-term concept plan, the trails concept plan, which shows possible linkage. This plan is under review right now by the Trails Committee to see whether there's parts of that need to be changed, refined, eliminated. So we're going to be looking at that, but you're welcome to take a look at it, and you see that there is a focus on interconnectivity of the trail systems. One other possible place for expansion is the Gloria Drive landfill, which could make a great biking hill. Along with connectivity, there's a chiller line that comes all the way out to Atlantic. That's a new water line that was put in to take chill water, I guess, up to Xerox in Webster. So there's a possibility. There's also sidewalks in part. I guess, no, there's not sidewalks there. But the goal would be to actually be able to have a loop that would be able to pick up people along this section and get up to Gloria Drive landfill. So that's kind of what's on our list right now that we're actively looking at. Yes?
I'm glad you mentioned Gloria Drive and the biking. You know, when we put the logo together, we had a bike there, and there was some debate. To what extent does the trail committee want to get into either on-road or off-road biking? But I'm glad that you picked it up there. There was a committee to do some more on-road stuff, and I just wondered what your committee, dovetailing, and you might want to pass this along to somebody else, but I'll
My
ask you.
personal opinion is that there are possible trails, some in Sherwood Fields, that could indeed be a multi-use activity. There are trails, however, that I would prefer not to see bikes on. Some of the trails are only, in sections, only about 2 feet wide. And how do you accommodate bikers on that trail along with pedestrians? I think that's would be a dangerous situation. But I think we need to look at which of our trails could indeed be bike accessible.
Well, I understand, I appreciate that. I guess my question is also expanded to on-road. To what extent does the trail committee look to on-road biking?
We at print time had an individual, Tim Murphy, on the Trails Committee that was really heading up the biking side of that. With this point in time, we are not actively involved with on-road biking in the town of Penfield, and that certainly is a charter that someone needs to pick up. That I can think of several places that improvements need to be made to the existing roadway system to accommodate bikers. Yes, Jenny?
Terry, talking about Mission Ditch, I have cross-country skied down through there, and you said nothing could be brought in or taken out. There were some big dips that it would be nice if there was just a couple of planks or something for a week. skiers.
We need to cross those ditches one at a time. Yeah, we need to look at what can we get easily versus where do we spend our resources to go through the DEC approval process if we feel that we need to put in a bridge. I can't give you a general answer. It really needs to be specific.
When you lead hikers through there, it's wet and, I mean, those dips have a little, if it's.
Yeah. I understand your concern, but I think we're talking in generalities right
Okay.
now. And
All right.
another question?
Yeah, well, I have a concern. I like the idea of what folks are considering. I do have a concern with regard to the interaction between bicycles and pedestrians. Not that you consider not only the safety aspect of it, but the fact that in some of these places, the soils are very sensitive. And as a matter of fact, for example, you mentioned the Rifle Range Trail. You're probably familiar with that long controversy over the classification, but ultimately, off-road bicycles were barred from that trail. So basically on the ground that the soils just couldn't withstand the pressure. So I would just urge, as you go forward with this, to consider that, the environmental aspect for the other trails.
Yes, I understand your point, and I agree with you. That we've seen where bikes have created ruts, which then lead to erosion points and create problems for even maintaining the trails. Okay, Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, the one trail that you didn't mention was Thousand Acre.
Oh,
At one point, there was discussion about connecting Thousand Acre to Rothfuss. Is that totally off the table?
The town owns some of the property along this area. The goal was actually to be able to come through Thousand Acre Swamp, but the Nature Conservancy resisted any encroachment of town trails in the Thousand Acre Swamp. They granted one minor easement across the corner to get from Rothfuss Park over into this area near Saldo Lane. There is a small easement from the Nature Conservancy, but they have been reluctant to provide any willingness to allow additional trails in their area. So we're looking at this path, which is pretty much on town property. The property owner down in this area is already willing to grant an easement. So we just need to, really try to walk the trail and see what it's going to take. It's a wetlands. I mean, there's water there. So it may require some, I don't want to take time away from our main speaker. I wanted to just give you kind of an overview of what the Trails Committee is looking at and how it might tie in with our guest speakers.
Thank you, Terry. Our Trails Committee has evolved in the last year with a lot more responsibilities. One of the things we need to define, refine, less meeting and more action in cooperation with both Mr. Supervisor and the Planning Department to get some of these sections done within the town of Penfield. The easiest and most linear and accomplished ones will be done first. These are our ambitions medium term that Terry just summarized. But now to the main portion, main theme of why we're gathered here, both public and thank you exhibitors again from coming. The two gentlemen are here. They're standing up. Their names are on the digital display. Rich Perrin, Director, and Genesee Transportation Council. And Rich is going to talk about who, where, what, why, and a little bit of the history of the Genesee Transportation Council and their responsibility and charges. And then we will talk about the Regional Trail Initiative and the $100,000 grant with Robert. Rich.
Thanks, Nels. Good morning, first off. Thanks for having us out to talk about this. I want to start by saying it's interesting being in Penfield. I mentioned this to Supervisor LaFone. I want to thank him. We've always had great support from the town, at least as long as I've been there, which is about 12 and a half years now. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize about Penfield, at least from our perspective on the transportation side, is the town has always been really a leader and more or less the cutting edge of where we're trying to take the transportation system. And I mention that because there's been a lot of attention paid when the city of Rochester completed its bicycle master plan, and then the town of Brighton finished up its what was it, Bob? Bike Walk Brighton. I think all caps, exclamation points. But in reality, it was the town of Penfield that conducted the first bicycle facilities master plan, actually a few years before anybody else did. And it was that foresight to look at it and say, how do we make our transportation system accessible to all users? And then we were talking earlier today, noticing the electric vehicle charging stations, and I was making mention of it again. Penfield, first ones to do that in our region. But again, just looking at it and saying, as you start to talk about trails, we've had an interest in this. Now, Bob's with me. Bob is our bicycle and pedestrian program manager, and he's going to go over the Regional Trails Initiative update, the ins and the outs. I'm going to give you a bit of background on what the Genesee Transportation Council is and why this fits in with our purpose and mission. So just as a by way of background, every area in the country with an urbanized population of 50,000 or more is required to have what's called a metropolitan planning organization to qualify for the receipt of federal highway and federal transit administration funds. And that's what we are to a 9-county area. Now, I believe in somewhere in here we've got a map. It's the same region that's on the map of the trails. Just to give you an idea of the region that we cover, about 4,700 square miles, population of about 1.2 million people, somewhere between 525,000 and 550,000 jobs. Just to give you an idea of what that means, that's larger than 8 entire states. So what we deal with from areas such as Yates County to the city of Rochester is pretty diverse and unique. And so what we look to do is say there are certain transportation needs that are universal across any type of area we deal with, whether it be urban, suburban, or rural. There's always going to be first and foremost a need for safety. The ability to travel where you want to go to, when you want to go there, with a reasonable expectation that you can do so without any major risks. But after that, we've also started to build off of that and say, no, our federally funded policy planning and investment decision-making policies need to take into account the bigger picture items. And those shift from time to time. But some of the things we look at is transportation's contribution to public health. Like I said, the basic, right is that you can move where you want to without having to worry about being in a crash. And we don't call them accidents. When people are driving distractedly, not paying attention, that's not an accident, that's a crash. But we said it's got to be more than that. There's got to be transportation's contribution to public health in the sense that we can promote and provide necessary facilities and programs for active transportation, walking and biking. Things that begin to reverse the sedentary lifestyles that we, as well as primarily the youngest generation, are starting to see. We have, as children, the first generation in human history that now have a life expectancy less than their parents, and a lot of it is the fact that they're not out, not being active. We need more of that. So it's not just physical infrastructure, it's programs and activities, Boy Scouts, things like that get people involved. Having them available, the facilities and the programs combined, help us to move forward. Very simply put, our mission is not to, develop an efficient, safe, intermodal system of roads, bridges, public transportation, and trails. That's not it at all. Transportation for transportation's sake is not going to be effective. What we look at is we need to maximize our contribution to quality of life and economic development. That's what transportation is there for, and therefore solely. So we are federally funded. They don't just give us the money and say, go forth and have a good time with it. We do have a few responsibilities. We have these core ones. And these kind of fit through what I think you'd consider to be sort of a rational process. And the first one is to do a long-range plan. This is our 20-plus year perspective on the system's existing and projected capabilities and needs, and then strategies for us to get there. From there, we begin to translate those strategies, because it really is a strategic plan. We begin to translate those strategies into more concept-level, location-specific plans via our annual planning work program. And then at the end, when we've got those more specific plans and concepts, our goal is to then implement them through our capital improvement program or our transportation improvement program. Any federal highway or transit administration funds that are going to be spent in the region have to be included in those. Now, it's really important to note that the long-range plan and the transportation improvement program, by federal regulation, need to be fiscally constrained, which is to say they're not wish lists. We can't just go and say, we think we're going to have, $4.5 billion over the next, year and a half. That's what I sound like when I talk about the funding, because we don't have enough of it. And I do it fairly regularly. But the reality is that we look at it and we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about anywhere between $55 and $65 million per year underfunded in terms of what we have requested. And that's primarily just to maintain the system we have and make limited expansions to public transportation, bicycle and pedestrian, and alternative fuel and alternative powered vehicles. We also have some other activities that we assist with: program development, technical assistance, and financial support. And that's where we've come in and been able to do things like the Irondequoit Creek Stream Corridor Trail feasibility study, providing support. Bob's able to go out, we do a pedestrian facilities inventory to go and take a look at, on federal aid roads, what is the not only presence but also condition of sidewalks. As we look to things, what are those bicycle facility master plans? The program development is really being able to support communities. I mean, the key to getting these things done, and Victor Hiking Trails is here, and we've had the pleasure to work with them on the Auburn Trail. And again, I was mentioning to Dave right here, and I said, these things aren't getting done because of us. That's not how it works. It gets done because of you. These people persevere. They stay at it. They stay positive. They recognize that these things are important, and that at the end of the day, having them is a lot better than not having them. And more people will begin to see that as, again, they stick with it. And that's how these things get done. We just saw this down in the village of Avon in Livingston County, replace the historic railroad bridge. It's now a multi-use trail. What makes that interesting is that they stayed with it for years. They started out with the initial version of the Regional Trails Initiative, which was completed in 2002, the first phase, 2004. That's what we're updating now, 10 years later. But they started out with that. Then they did a feasibility study to say, what's the preferred alignment? What do we want our options to look like in terms of design and accoutrements? Do we need benches? Whatever it might be. And then they were able to take that, show the community support, and bring it to fruition. And it just opened, I think, this past fall. I think they had probably about the same type of day as we have out to do it. And clearly the bridge is not inside, so we're more fortunate than they were. I'm going to let Bob talk about the benefits of active transportation. What I want to say, though, is you have to understand that we are a transportation agency. And so as we do this, you have to note that for recreation, we're not involved in that. And that's not by, some internal decision. That is a federal edict, if you will. We're not in the business of recreation. Now, with that said, if the trails that we plan for, build, and get maintained by owners are used for recreation, so be it, even better. Again, that gets back to that whole idea of transportation's contribution to public health and promoting an active lifestyle. But with that said, when we plan for these trails, there are certain design guidelines that we have to follow. And so in most cases, these are going to be asphalt or stone dust trails. But at the same time, I think the point was well made by this gentleman. There's times when you don't want those types of trails. There's times when you want trails for hiking, when you want them for active recreation, not making trips, whether it be work-related or social. That's what you're going to want to have. And so as we go through this process for the Regional Trails Initiative, it's absolutely critical that we get your input often and early, or I should say early and as often as possible, because we have to know that's not a good place to put an 8 or 10 foot wide stone dust or asphalt trail. There's going to be times when we want to have that because of the terrain, because of physical features that you'd have to deal with. They're just better suited for hiking or cross-country skiing. Again, our emphasis is on walking and biking for the multi-use trails. We have issues whenever we have to deal with snowmobiles. These are non-motorized multi-use trails. But at the end of the day, and Bob's going to go through, our basis for this, why we've put an emphasis on this to a large degree, and probably to more of a degree than other similar agencies, both in New York State and across the country. Simple reason is we heard it from you, and we heard it from you for these reasons. So our point is to come out, be able to talk with you, and get a feel for what you see. What are your priorities? At the end of the day, this isn't a plan for GTC. This is a plan for the region, which is to say for the community, to improve its bicycle and pedestrian facilities that can be used for specific trip making or for just getting out there and enjoying what I would like to consider, at least in my experience, one of the most beautiful parts of the country that we have here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Bob's got his own microphone. I'm the director, but he gets his own microphone. We'll talk about that Monday. But at the, we'll do it at the end. Yeah, can we do it at the end? Is that all right? Sounds good. All right, thank you. So Bob's going to go on. One of the things that I am going to do as Bob talks about this, and you don't have to do it right away, we brought basically a sign-up sheet. And we'll pass that around in a little bit when Bob talks about what the Regional Trails Initiative is. And then when you're ready to answer a question, or when you're ready to ask a question and get an answer to it, I'll have this microphone to bring it over to you, which they asked me to do so that they can make sure everyone hears you. So now for the good part, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Honestly, Rich was giving me a hard time, but I've never used one of these portable mics before. So I just want to say first, thank you very much for inviting us to come out here. Just after seeing the introduction where they were describing what you're doing in the town here, there's so much going on. It is really exciting. And it's exciting for me because knowing that we're going forward with the update to the plan, to know that Penfield is not the only town that has excitement, but this level of excitement is great. But to know that there's a lot of folks out here who realize the importance of basically active transportation, it's good to know. It makes us feel as if we're doing something that's valued by the community. And I should also say that I've been with GTC since 2005. I came out here, I literally started working about 5 days before the Safety Lou Transportation Bill authorization, the 2 federal bills ago, was approved. So I've kind of been, I arrived right after the Regional Trails Initiative was initially adopted, the 2004 version of it. And I don't know if I've ever told Rich this, but before I came out here, I lived in California, and when I saw the advertisement for this job, Genesee Transportation Council, my wife and I, we had wanted to move the family to the east, and when I saw this job and read about the Regional Trails Initiative on the website, I was just so enthusiastic that when I went home and I told my wife, I told her, I'm going to get this job. I mean, I told her I knew I was going to get the job. I don't know why that was, but and so it's really good to still be around here for one thing, but to see that the plan has actually had some real benefits for the community, and it has been to some degree implemented. And like any plan, things need to be updated as time goes by. And 10 years is really just about the right time frame for this. And part of the reason that it's good to see that it needs to be updated is because that shows you that people are accomplishing things. And just to piggyback on a point Rich made is, you know, I don't take credit, we don't take credit for all this great stuff that happens, but we kind of do take credit for at least getting it in one place in the plan. And that's all the community, putting all the things you know and getting them all together. So these plans really do, in my opinion, have a lot of benefits. With the active transportation, these are just some of the benefits that we look towards. And maybe to expand the title a little bit, this could really be thought of the benefits of providing active transportation infrastructure. If you provide the infrastructure that people need, what kind of benefits occur? Well, the benefits, you see benefits to safety, because by allowing people, bicyclists, for example, giving them space on the road to separate from motor vehicles improves their safety. By providing sidewalks that allow people to walk separately from the traffic or not have to walk on the shoulder, it improves their safety. By providing multi-use trails and designing them correctly, that improves the safety because it allows bicyclists to get off the highways, and it allows pedestrians to also not have to use the highway shoulder or whatever. But also the safety has to be taken into account. It's a guiding principle of the design for these types of facilities. Choices is really, it's to some degree it's an equity thing, but people want to have choices for the types of decisions that they make, because that allows you to make a better decision. If if you just need to go, you know, a mile to get a gallon of milk or something, or to pick something up at the store, it's just a lot cheaper economically and a lot healthier to be able to walk and do it, or to make short trips walking or using a bicycle instead of using a motor vehicle. And also in terms of choices come into effect with people that are too young to drive, you know, or too old to drive, or that have disabilities and need options besides driving a single-person automobile. Health is clearly one of the greatest benefits of active transportation, because when you think about it, when you travel in a motor vehicle, you're paying money to travel. When you travel with active transportation, you're almost making money, because the exercise that you get really does improve your health, and it's just such a positive in terms of prevention. It's a preventive medicine in a sense. And then in terms of the economy, that has a lot to do with, you know, the average motor vehicle costs roughly $7,000 a year to drive. You know, if somebody can ride their bike or walk and avoid a few trips, or ride the public transportation, that's an important component to link up to active transportation. They can take advantage of some of these benefits. So the reason, the way that we help to bring some of these benefits to fruition is through the planning and implementation of the infrastructure and the programs that's needed for these projects. Now, this is just to touch on the facility types. Basically, there's really three, and this was kind of mentioned in passing. For bicyclists, the primary place for bikes to ride is on the street. A properly designed street is going to have space for bicycles because they are part of traffic. And so bicycling, even though the existing roadway network is far from perfect, it at least has a network that you can build on and improve to start with. And the other distinguishing feature is that usually the streets are already owned by either the municipality or the county or the state. So you already have kind of some ownership there, so that makes potentially the development of those bicycling facilities a little bit easier. You have to provide the physical space, you have to provide the money, but there may be, sometimes it's a little bit easier than multi-use trails when I get down to the bottom here. With walking, you know, your primary facilities are going to be sidewalks, and I know the town has made great efforts and a lot of progress in terms of providing sidewalks. The thing about sidewalks, it's kind of similar to the bicycling, is that ideally it would be nice if you have the right of way to put sidewalks along, you know, your existing roads and streets. You don't always, but at least then you're still building on an existing network, the roadway network. You're trying to make it into complete streets, which provide bicycle space and provide accommodations for pedestrians. The third type of facility here is really what we're talking about here today, and we're calling them multi-use trails. Sometimes people refer to them as shared use paths. And the reason that multi-use trails are important is because they allow both pedestrians and bicyclists a place of their own to use the facility. And there are a lot of people, especially among bicyclists, that are very, very reluctant to ride along, even if it's a designated bike lane, or even if there's a lot of space along the shoulder, because they just don't feel comfortable. So the multi-use trails are really a key ingredient in terms of the long transportation for active transportation. The difficulty is with multi-use trails is you don't usually have an existing network there. You don't have the roadway network that you can either add sidewalks to or add bike lanes to. To some degree, you might have an existing network of old abandoned you know, railroad corridors and things like that, or power corridors. But generally speaking, the multi-use trails, you're trying to put those in place on top of a system that's already there. So that's really kind of a large part of the challenge with the multi-use trails. Now, as far as with these facility types, GTC plans for, and we do allocate funding for all three of these types of improvements. Now, I'm going to guess here. No, darn it. Okay. Okay, so I explained what a multi-use trail is, and I kind of explained why they are important. I just, generally speaking, with a multi-use trail, just as a rough ballpark, you're talking 8 to 10 feet wide. There are specifications for the slope, and there are specifications for clearance on the side. And there are specifications for the surface materials for that. And the reason that there are those criteria is that multi-use trails, generally speaking, when we talk about them here at GTC, we're talking about something that's compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is, so that anybody, people of all abilities can use the trail. And that's what leads to the requirement for what they refer to as a stable, firm and slip-resistant surface, I think is the term that's used for the trail itself, for the surface itself, so that people could roll a wheelchair on it, they can ride a bike, and they can walk safely. Now, this is a picture of the Canalway Trail, and this has a surface which is stone dust, which is kind of the traditional surface for multi-use trails in many areas. And stone dust is, in fact, it's a very, they used to call it a macadamized road, and there was a guy in Scotland named McAdam, I think, that invented it. And it's a very old technology which was used for motor vehicle roads, but it's perfect for trails too. There are people who don't like it for some reasons. Long distance bicyclists a lot of times aren't happy with it, but in general, the one surface that a lot of times you'll see on the multi-use trails is going to be the stone dust. The other alternative would be the asphalt or concrete. Why they are important, I think I've talked about that. Okay, so then we get into planning. So we want to make sure, I've had people at public meetings, not to me, but to other folks say, well, this is a waste of money. Why are you doing it? You're spending $100,000 and nothing's going to come out of it. Well, the fact is that if you don't plan, you just can't possibly make the best decisions you need to make when you're investing money. And if you've got huge competition for a very limited amount of funding, you better plan it the best you possibly can, because otherwise you're going to be making some ill-informed decisions. And part of what I consider my job to be is to provide information to people that do make those decisions so they can make good decisions. Now, when we do these plans, we have to plan them at both levels. Well, the regional and local scale, why both? It's maybe not always obvious, but probably everybody's heard the story about you're building a railroad from one direction and the other direction, and they meet and they're an inch apart. Something like that. You don't want to do that with the trail. You want to make sure that things link up at the edges of the town. And I've heard the conversations earlier today. Parrington sounds like you've got a lot going on in terms of those linkages, but that's the main reason for the regional scale, is to make sure that the smaller units link together. But as well, on the map over here, you can't see it, but we have the Erie Canalway Trail marked, and we have the Genesee Valley Greenway marked. Well, those extend even outside the region. So, you got to plan at regional scale, but you got to realize sometimes it's even larger than a regional scale. But there's a need for planning at both levels to make sure, and especially one of the benefits of local planning is that that's really the only place you can get the kind of input like people can provide here, because I don't live in Parrington. I live in Greece or Penfield. So I'm not familiar with the local situation here, except as far as what I can find out. Same thing when consultants come in to do studies. They need to get the local knowledge on these issues. So what have we done? Rich has mentioned the Regional Trails Initiative. That was really done in 2002 to 2004. There was 2 phases to that. The first one was within the Rochester TMA, the Transportation Management Area, which is the main area that we focus on immediately adjacent to Monroe County. And then the second area is the Priority Trails Advancement Studies, and those are sort of the smaller scale feasibility studies. The slide there shows the Irondequoit Creek multi-use trail study, which was done back in, I think, 2008, or I can't see the date here at that time, but that studied quite a few of the sections that are in here. So there's a lot of times, even if these local studies don't immediately become implemented, that they can become valuable going forward, because the work that's been done is not lost. It's still there. Okay, so then at 2 levels. We talk about the Regional Trails Initiative. The original purpose of the Regional Trails Initiative was that we wanted to create a regional trail system that served the region and helped to, as Rich said, ensure that the transportation system is providing the maximum benefit to the vitality of the region. We want to make sure that that system integrates with the existing transportation system. Like I mentioned, the bicycle and the sidewalk system and with the road system. And then the third is a part of that is it can be something that is a distinguishing feature of the region. You know, like the town wants to be and should be proud of the things that it's done. The region itself, that can be a real draw for employers who want to come to this region, or people who want to just come and visit. The fourth bullet I have there is public involvement. That is just key, and it's critical. When we, the first Regional Trails Initiative, when those were done, there were workshops held all over first the transportation management area, and then all over the 9 counties to get the public's ideas and suggestions to make sure that we were capturing that information out there. This is just to, I'm glad you had some colored maps here because I've got more here. This is, after the Regional Trails Initiative, the first one was done, they go through a long process, and I'll talk about it a little bit later here, but eventually what you come up with is recommendations, and we divide it up into near, mid, and long-term recommendations. Now this map here shows at that time in 2002 when this was done, the existing trails are in brown, the ones that are under development shown in gold here, and the ones that were the near-term recommendations are shown in green. Now, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but there's been a lot of changes since this was published in 2002, and pretty good ones. This shows the midterm implementation recommendation from the Regional Trails Initiative. Now, just something to mention here is to emphasize is that this is just within the TMA. A similar process was done for the rest of the 9 counties. So there's a map that covers the whole 9 counties that is similar for this, and same with the first one. But what this does here is you look into a near-term, mid-term, you start to prioritize things so that you can get a strategy to invest the funding for the projects. And then here, this is the long-term. So this map shows pretty much within the Rochester area all the recommendations that were included in the Regional Trails Initiative. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at them all here together because, for one thing, some of the ones that were under development at that time did get developed, but not exactly as they were envisioned. Some of them that were developed were completely constructed. You know, some of them have been studied and determined to not be feasible, really, at least at this point in time. And then some of them, nothing has happened. But the fact is that because the situation has changed so much, we've got to bring it all together so that we know what the status is now. This is the status, what it was like 10 years ago, but there have been a lot of changes in that time. So that's the Regional Trails Initiative. I'm going to jump back just a little bit to talk about the local studies that have done, because the other component to the trail planning was that the Regional Trails Initiative, I just showed you the map that identified these potential projects. GTC provided funding for feasibility studies through our work program for these trail feasibility studies through a project called the Priority Trails Advancement Program. Now, what this does is what's referred to as concept level planning and design. It looked at the trails that were within the Regional Trails Initiative, and then it researched, you know, where's the right-of-way? What are the key design elements that need to be included? Like, you know, the width of the trail, what type of surface of the trail, what environmental obstacles do you have to deal with? Provides cost estimation. If you're trying to propose, if you end up having to propose a trail through a wetland or something where you have to have a boardwalk, it's going to be real expensive. The very first slide here showed the Turning Point Basin Park in Rochester, which is a great project, but very expensive. And so you need to get a sense before you try to proceed for funding of what a trail is going to cost you. And that's one of the things that these feasibility studies help to do. And then the last that's listed here as of the first 4 is to identify potential funding sources and partners for the project, because none of these projects, no trail project is ever going to go forward based on the fact that GTC, solely based on the fact that it's in a plan that we do, because without the community wanting to do something, it's not going to happen. Because, for one thing, the money is so tight that you got to have a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of coordination and a willingness to recognize some of the trade-offs that are involved in terms of funding some of these projects. Again, the public involvement for these feasibility studies is just essential. And so with the Regional Trails Initiative and the Priority Trails Advancement Program, having this large-scale plan and doing these feasibility studies at a smaller scale, what kind of results have we seen? And this is a generalized result because I need to clarify that when a project when we say it's partially constructed, that may be 25%, 50%, 30%. The number here, this $10.5 million, that is an approximation of the projects that were studied within the Regional Trails Initiative, these feasibility studies. The ones that were either fully or partially implemented is about $10.5 million since 2004. Of the studies that have been done, about a quarter have been partly implemented, 25% fully implemented, and then about half have been not implemented. What is important to point out is that about half of those, so another 25%, are at least partly feasible. So sometimes when we do these studies, we'll end up with a project that's feasible, but the community may not be ready to really get behind it at this point for whatever reason. So a lot of times, these plans, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but occasionally, these may end up on the shelf, but that's not always the end of the world, because sometimes these trails take 10 or 20 years to get completed. And it's important to have the plans ready in some cases, because you might find funding that you didn't know was available, and if you can be prepared, it can help you to move forward more quickly. This is just, I realize this is very hard to see, but this is just showing generally the trail status in the region, which is very similar to the map that's posted over here. I've put some little icons on here to show where federally funded trail projects have occurred, and those are showed with the squared boxes. And then the little triangles on this map are just the feasibility studies. I realize you can't see it, but what this does show is that there have been projects, first of all, funded that weren't in the Regional Trails Initiative or that haven't had feasibility studies done, but at the same time, there's also a lot of overlap for those as well. And then the second part of it is that the feasibility studies have been pretty well distributed, because we relied on the process of letting all our member agencies know during the development of our work program that this funding was available. And these studies are driven by the community. We don't do the feasibility studies unless the community comes to GTC and submits an application for funding. So there has to be some community enthusiasm and involvement to even begin these studies. And to succeed with them, it's essential. So why an update? Well, I mentioned earlier, the RTI is 10 years old. A lot of these projects have been completed. And what that leads to is that we really do need to update the recommendations, because when you have a series of recommendations and some of them are completed and some of them aren't, it loses a lot of its value, because you can't compare the projects as well as you'd like, because you don't have a complete set of information. You're missing information on which ones have been completed and which ones haven't. We want to focus on the key gaps. One of the reasons when we initially started to think that it was time to update this is that when the Regional Trails Initiative was completed, we had the system, there was a lot of gaps in it, and those gaps were identified. Now a lot of these gaps have been filled in, so we need to go back and really tightly focus on what are the key gaps that are going to best serve the most community, the best serve the community. In this map here, there's a lot of recommendations. It may be that the update doesn't have as many recommendations, or that tries to more tightly focus so that the projects that do go forward are more likely to be funded and to be completed. And that kind of ties in with the third point here, where I talk about the lessons learned. When we do these the feasibility studies, there are times when you get through the process and you just say, well, unfortunately, this is something, even if the community really wants it, it's going to be very difficult or just may not even be feasible. A lot of times when that comes up is with respect to the ownership of the right-of-way, or there may be other conditions that really, before you start to invest even too much money in studying the feasibility of a trail, you want to kind of filter that a little bit so that people don't get the expectations that they're going to be able to do something that's not going to be feasible when they get through the process. So that's really, and then we want to identify, based on what has happened in the last 10 years that's been completed, what has been a success for that. So, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, because this really describes what, very similar to a typical planning process with using a rational planning process. Basically, what we're going to do for the Regional Trails Initiative update is we're going to inventory the existing and planned conditions. What that means is we're going to find out where physically on the ground all these trails are. And that's a lot more difficult than it sounds, because when I look at these maps and everything, and you can look at this stuff on Google Earth, and you can, there's other ways to research it, but there's a lot of trails out there. And unfortunately, I wish that I could have a job where I could just go out and inspect trails all day. That'd be great. But I don't. And well, at least not enough to complete it. But we want to get a good handle, and the other part of that is obviously, we need to get that into a geographical information system. We have it now, but we essentially want to update what we have right now, existing and planned conditions. We want to look at, and some of the other existing conditions relate to, kind of tie in with the needs analysis. We want to look at, like, where are people who don't own vehicles? Where do they live? Where are lower income people live? Where, you can look at where the places that people want to go to, the destinations. So there's a lot that goes into the inventory and the needs analysis. But this is a chance for the public, essentially, to help us and the folks who help us to develop the plan to complete the needs analysis and the inventory of existing and planned condition. Because once you know what the situation is on the ground, and a part of that is also developing a vision. Everybody talks about, vision statements are very important, but part of the early part of the process is to decide, well, what do we want out of this system? What are the type of benefits that we want to bring to the community when these trails are provided? Once you do that initial work on the project, we look to the development of alternatives. One of the things that's kind of interesting about alternatives is that a lot of times when we do a feasibility study, you might have like 3 alternatives. You have point A, point B, 3 different ways to get from A to B. And then you can rank them and pick the best one. When we talk about alternatives for a plan like a Regional Trails Initiative, a lot of times you're talking about 50 or 100 alternatives, because you have a whole bunch of potential trails, and you need to find some way to prioritize which ones of those you want to develop first. So that's a process that, using the information we get during the public involvement in the first part of the process, we develop these alternatives, draft a plan, and then we bring the public back out to review that plan, to comment on that plan, and before the plan is finalized, we address those comments and we incorporate them into the plan. This is a little bit more specific information on how we work with the existing and planned condition. You can see we look at the plans people have done that are on the books, the ones the town is doing, groups. We look at the feasibility studies that we've completed as well. We look at the system I just mentioned. Development status is really important because there's a lot that's going on. And I feel at times that at GTC that I'm pretty much aware of most of the trail development that's going on in the region, but not always. And part of that is because we have great partners that keep us informed of what they're doing a lot of times. but we need to know. We need to know where the sections of the Auburn Trail that are completed and where these gaps are, because when we get to the point where we're identifying gaps, we really need to know. The only way you can figure out where the gap is to know where the trail is that you need to link. And then surface conditions. That's also very important, because some of the trails, they may not technically be a multi-use trail at this time, but maybe there's a desire in the community to upgrade those trails. Maybe it's an existing trail that needs to be rehabilitated or reconstructed or updated and better maintained. We want to look at the ownership, because like I mentioned before, the ownership of trails is not necessarily like the ownership of roads at all, because trails can be owned by the state, it could be owned by a conservancy, it could be owned by the town. There's a lot of different owners involved with this trail system, and where that comes into play is with the maintenance, because whoever owns the trail usually is going to be the one that's primarily responsible for the maintenance. And one of the things we want to do is look on a regional scale is how can you best coordinate the maintenance that's done, because the you only have a limited amount of time, and you want to do it of money, and you want to do it as quickly as possible. I mentioned the advocacy groups and the destinations, and then the needs analysis. I mentioned the gaps between the trails, surface conditions, destinations, populations. Again, this is another point for public involvement. Recommendations, we've got priority projects. We want to look at updated design guidelines, because there's several different sets of guidelines that are used for multi-use trails, and those have been recently updated. We need to keep in touch with that. We want to develop maintenance strategies. We want to identify funding strategies. And again, there's going to be public involvement in the development of these recommendations as well. Okay, how you can help the next steps. We have a list here that we were going to, maybe if folks had questions, and certainly I would encourage everybody at some point to sign up if you want to find out and stay in touch for the process here. You can tell us you're interested. You can participate. We're going to have workshops and events going forward with this Development of Regional Trails Initiative update. There will be a way to provide input over the web, so there will be that opportunity as well. And you can always contact us for further information. We are always happy to help and come out and participate in events like this and help in any way we can. So that's pretty much it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. Yes?
Thank you for doing this. This is great. I'm very excited about it. The one thing I didn't hear was timeline.
So we'll use the microphone. We're taping this. The thing we want to do is be able to put this on our website. Anybody can go that couldn't make it here today, and then they can see the whole presentation. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. I just wanted to know what your timeline is, when you're going to hopefully be completed with this.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. We are right now in the final stages of negotiating our contract with the consultant, and we get this stuff done within a year. 1 year timeline is what we'd be looking at. So within the next few months, we will be starting on the public involvement. It's going to be soon. Yes.
I'm a big fan of these multi-use trails with the crushed stone. But I do have a question. It's really two questions. Number one, is anybody accumulating data on what the safety record is once one of these trails is built? For example, collisions between pedestrians and bicyclers. And secondly, is anyone accumulating data on, once the trail is built, how much use is it getting? There's a lot of money involved here. I would hate to think trails are being built and they're just not being used very much.
I'll make just mention of it. Yes, we are counting the trails. Unlike when we do highways where we have continuous counters, there's a methodology for it. So you get a certain time period, and then you can begin to translate that out to what the daily usage is. In terms of the safety issue, it seems kind of counterintuitive because you look at most of the trails and you go, oh, well, this is east-west, so there must be roads. If people are moving from the roads to the trails, they're being safer. But without really knowing specific origins and destinations, you're kind of talking about correlation as opposed to cause and effect. Because you don't know for a fact that that person would have used this particular facility. Because you have multiple roads that might run east-west, you only have one trail. Well, were they on the roadway where there was the preponderance of bicycle and vehicle collisions? You don't know it. We've looked into that, and it always kind of comes back, pardon me, to the popsicles and drownings. Have you heard this one? As popsicle sales increase, so do drownings, so popsicles must cause drownings. No, it's because people eat more popsicles and do more swimming in the summer. We just don't know if there's another factor in between there without knowing where they started and where they were going to, if they would have used that facility. Generally, when we track crashes or particularly fatalities of worst type, we do it on a 3-year rolling average so that we can take out any abnormalities from 1 year. But, we've seen, I think up until this year, fatalities nationwide have declined every year for about the past 40 or 50. We just don't know if it's a cause or effect or if it could be some other factor. Generally, though, as Bob noted, one of the benefits is you are spending money, but clearly it's safer because there aren't any vehicles on the multi-use trails.
And maybe I could touch on that real quick too, is that that's one of the key designs for multi-use trails is how to make sure the bicyclists and pedestrians are separated and safe. So there's a lot of restrictions in terms of if there's a slope, you want to have a good curve for them, you want to have line of sight. And then the other area where it comes up is when a multi-use trail needs to cross the road, then there's lots of safety considerations and issues that we look at for those too. Yes, sir.
I'll be brief. I want to thank you for coming out. I've heard you guys before. I'm familiar with some of your projects like Tryon, biking, and Robinson's and EDR's multi-use projects, and I think those are all good projects. So I want to thank Tony LaFountain, Nels, and also Terry. If we could be a little specific here a little bit, I know you guys have got some good hands-on, and you also have some good support, money-wise or whatever. On the east side of Monroe County, what projects are you working on currently? Could you update me?
Well, beyond the trails, let me take this. Beyond the trails, we have
Either multi-use or on the road.
Well, and I was just going to mention that right now there is the active transportation plan for Parrington that's starting off. Okay. Brighton completed theirs. When you look at, and it's a little bit different, but Webster recently completed a circulation, accessibility, and parking program that looked at increasing in the village core safety and accessibility for. We provided the funding and technical assistance to them. Yeah, I'm trying to think.
What about parent?
So Penfield's got to come up here next on one of these.
Well, I think Penfield, as I mentioned, when it comes to the actual on-street bicycle facilities plan, Penfield was the very first, and that's probably about 6 years.
But we're time for recycling, right?
Well, we do our.
As I get older, I'm more anxious.
I will say that we do our annual call for projects and look at that, and I think, too, one of the things that's going to be coming out is we just recently, the governor just the state made their award announcements for what was the Transportation Enhancements Program for bicycle and pedestrian projects statewide in the region. We're starting another one of those, or the state is starting another one very soon. I would be very surprised, and since we have Victor here as well as you, I'd be surprised if we didn't see the Irondequoit Multi-Creek Trail. I know in speaking with Jeff Benway, Jeff had this great phasing plan. He's realistic about how to get it done. The town of Farmington, along with the towns of Canandaigua and city of Canandaigua, came down with an extension. Auburn, right? Mm-hmm. Just recently completed that. So we have a lot more plans on the books than we have funding available, but that's definitely a big one. And this goes for, yeah, please.
A comment? See, what I see when I look at the trail logo, I see the bike. And as I said before, we were debating, do we put that on there? And I think Jim Peters is the guy that really wanted the bike. So when I listen to hear Terry and Nels in the trail committee, and they're kind of got their hands full with their trail work, primarily for hikers. There isn't much effort or many people involved in the multi-use and the on-road, and I see that's where you guys could help us. Help us all. Make it safe.
Sure, Bob doesn't just do the trails too. I mean, one of the things that we look at when we make our highway decisions, and there's a lot of talk now about these complete streets, and Bob mentioned it. You know, one of the things that we've done from the get-go really with our investment decisions is we have a recognized performance-based quantitative decision-making process for how we do these investments. So our long-range plan has, I think, 12 or 15 performance measures. All of our criteria for evaluating projects go directly back to those metrics. One of the things that we've always done for any highway or bridge project, and Terry mentioned this about a particular bridge, is we ask if there are bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, what are you doing to improve those? If they're not there, are you going to put them there? Now here's where the incentivization comes in. If you have a $900,000 project and you can add we'll say a $950,000 project, you can add $50,000 to add bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The federal government's paying 80 cents on the dollar for that project. Your project scores significantly better if you include those bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. They're a marginal increase in the total project cost, and you're only paying 20 cents on the dollar. So we've incentivized that so whenever it's done. Now there's been an emphasis on preventive maintenance. We don't have the money to necessarily go rehab and rebuild. We happen to have a very progressive New York State Department of Transportation region. And they have said, if we can do it with paint, we're all for it. We'll work with the traffic and safety group to make sure that there's room. But I would say that almost in every instance, now when we come up with a project, we're looking to add that bicycle and pedestrian space. Again, I mean, you're always going to need room for cars and trucks. I mean, I kind of laugh when you look at the winter we have right now. And, you know, everybody still wants their 6 different types of pears at Wegmans. How do you think those things get there? I mean, they're with trucks. So we have to obviously take care of that. But at the same time, the balance has been so far towards automobiles, personal cars and trucks, that we've worked as much as we can to move that balance back and first and foremost ensure safety, and then from there start working towards expanding choices, and that's where the trails come in.
More homes, apartments. Sure. More people are coming in. We got younger people. They're on the road. They're on the bicycles, and there's a greater need.
Absolutely. And I'm an East Side resident, so I balance out Bob from Greece. So I want to see it done too.
Yes, I just have a general question about your relationship to the towns and the planning boards. It seems to me that transportation is integral to the development within any town. And so with regard to planning commissions or zoning commissions, so for instance, you look at new housing areas, are you trying to ensure that sidewalks are put into those areas? Are you sure that then the town is taking into account the existing system and maybe improvements to the system so that those people have a choice besides just automobiles?
Actually, I don't know, was that, did you have him do that as a plug, another plug for Penfield? Nice. The reason thank you for the softball. I appreciate those. You guys have been great. One of the other areas that we have is a community transportation planning component. And so the actual land use decisions, development, are made at the municipal level. I mean, those are made at the town level. Obviously, if you get within 500 feet of pretty much anything, there's some county planning board review depending on the scale of the project. That's just general municipal law, section 239. But we have always said, we started out saying we need to coordinate land use and transportation planning. And we've moved past that to saying we need to integrate it. And so one of the things I always make it a point of is that simple supply and demand. The supply is the transportation system, infrastructure, services. It's somewhat fixed and finite as a matter of 2 things. One, cost, and financial resources. The other one, temporal, the time it takes to get through the approvals to build a new road even just to replace a road, much less build anything new. That's the supply. So you know what it is. That's our inventory of existing and planned conditions. The demand side is land use. When you approve development that outstrips the supply, you clearly end up with issues. We're there to help support that. But one of the things that Penfield applied for and has now received two separate grants is to look at more or less how do we begin to truly integrate it through development regulations that are supportive of alternative transportation. And so there's a couple of areas where they're looking at that right now. A portion along 250 as well as Manitow Lake. And then there'll be two other areas that are going to be looked at that will then be combined as a guidebook and with design guidelines. And I should say as a design guide. We like those types of things because one of the things we don't want to be doing is funding this in every community. We have 189 or 190 municipalities. So we look for the transferability of it. And so when Penfield does theirs, we'll then be able to go out to other communities and say, we don't need to fund you to do this. You can just take this to your town or village attorney or municipal attorney and make some changes to it. With that said, going back years, probably one of Bob's first items in 2005 was to look at bicycle and pedestrian supportive code language. And we assembled code language from New York State and then created fact sheets. And one of the things we found was, I think it was the Penfield sidewalk policy that we included as a prime example of how to do these things. So we have those tools there. And that's what we make available to communities. And I think part of it is getting out so that the communities in the region, the municipalities, cities, towns, and villages are aware that we're here to provide that assistance to them. We can't always do the financial support, but we can always do the technical assistance. And so I think you're starting to see those decisions that are integrated simply by the fact that we looked and talked with people and said, well, what do you need to do that? Because in a lot of cases, it's not a function of a municipality doesn't want to do it. They can't do it because they just don't have the resources on the transportation side. And a lot of times, even here, it's Atlantic Avenue, but it's New York State Route 286. And so we've tried to build a strong relationship with the New York State Department of Transportation, recognizing that their roads are people's main streets. And the shift has to be from just thinking of them as conveyances for cars and trucks and automobiles to having more of that balance. So we're getting there. It's a slow and steady process, but like I said, I think we have the best New York State DOT region in the state. We really do.
You're young. You got a lot of years left.
Oh, I'm plenty impatient already. Anybody else? I see Nels is coming up probably to snatch a microphone here. Slowly I turn. All right.
Thank you. Let's give him a hand. Genesee Regional Transportation Council, Rich and Robert. Again, closing the gaps. How can we help each other from the town, the private hiking perspective, and the council in feasibly springboarding and getting these gaps physically closed so systems do connect to systems? Please now revisit your exhibitors. Devour the concession stand and line your pocket with take-home goodies. Again, thank you to Terry, our PTC staff, Mr. Supervisor, the Planning Board, the Genesee Transportation Council on some perspectives here. Revisit your exhibitors, schmooze, slink around, consume the goodies. Thank you, Nels Carm at PTC. It's a television program, signing off.